Hello, my name is Josh Lippman, and I'll be talking about the Interview Insights workstream of this Validus project. So just to give some context on what this workstream is, we were basically looking to understand some qualitative, unquantifiable details about a few topics, about how the elderly non-elderly disabled populations differ in their living preferences and requirements and what they look for. Secondly, how their housing search and application process differs, as well as the difference in alternative options that they have. And lastly, to understand the difference in the size and needs for each respective population. And in order to do this, we conducted interviews with BHA residents and applicants, former and current applicants, as well as experts. We interviewed experts from a number of organizations to understand their perceptions of the elderly and non-elderly disabled populations, how they're different, and how going through the housing application is different for them. And we discovered that there are differences, structural differences, between the elderly population and the non-elderly population in how they look at and go through the housing application process. The conclusion that we're showing here on this slide is that as the elderly and non-elderly disabled populations go through the same housing process, there are structural inherent difficulties that the elderly have in comparison with the non-elderly disabled population as they go through the application process. So in this graphic here, the funnel in the middle, the red circles represent non-elderly disabled applicants and the blue circles represent elderly applicants. So this is to say, if you were to start off with equal populations, the first filter that disadvantages the elderly population is who chooses to apply to the BHA. And here we found there are a number of elderly people living in dangerous, unstable situations who would qualify for the BHA who may not apply. And why that is we'll get into more detail in the following slides about all of these factors, but the idea is they may live with family members or friends in unsafe situations, and that happens in a higher percentage with elderly populations than non-elderly disabled populations. The second is their ability to live in geographies. We found that elderly people had more geographic restrictions than non-elderly disabled applicants. Lastly, the difficulty of living in mixed age demographic housing between elderly and non-elderly disabled populations give a disincentive for elderly to apply. And lastly, we found that the elderly were less able to put together a strong application, despite efforts by advocates in the BHA itself to help all applicants, including many services aimed at helping elderly applicants. There still exists this difficulty for the elderly population filling out an application. So going into a bit more detail. First, we found that seniors often stay in unsafe and unreasonable housing alternatives. So seniors have more options available to them. They may have children, friends, family members who have an extra couch or a bed to share or a basement or an attic. And these are all situations that seniors end up living in that are really not ideal living situations for the seniors, but the seniors, we heard a number of stories of them living in these situations and not applying to the BHA because of that. And then in talking with some experts, we found that the elderly options can sometimes be more limited than the non-elderly disabled populations. That there are other options for alternative housing that are available to non-elderly disabled population that are not available to the elderly population. Second, we found that seniors tend to be geographically constrained. So just the nature of someone in an elderly population is going to have ties to a certain neighborhood or area. They may have lived near family, neighbors, or friends for a long time. They may have relationships with doctors, hospitals, pharmacies. And these relationships, by the nature of being a senior, tend to be longer. They could have been someone who's lived in the neighborhood for 60 years. and grown up there. And because of that, they're going to put on their housing application that they're only willing to live in those neighborhoods. And so these geographic constraints that are inherent to the elderly population end up making them less favorable candidates as they go through the housing process than, say, a younger, non-elderly disabled applicant who may be more flexible in where he or she may want to live. Next, there are concerns that we heard about from the elderly population, from advocates for the elderly population, in living with non-elderly disabled populations as they would in the BHA housing units. So they obviously have different lifestyles and different hours that they may be awake. We heard of seniors having fears of the non-elderly disabled being up later or making loud noise, keeping music on loud, and also about the non-elderly disabled keeping different hours and different safety concerns. The elderly disabled, the elderly population has a primary concern for safety, and so even this perception, just the perception itself, is a barrier for seniors to apply to the BHA and other public housing. And because of this, we really see that some seniors choose not to submit an application. That's something that we didn't see as much with the non-elderly disabled population. Lastly, as the elderly population go through the application process, they face inherent difficulties. So we know that there are a lot of there's a lot of help and resources out for seniors and for all applicants. But even with these resources out, some seniors are not able to take advantage of them. So one example was English language help, that the BHA offers English language support to non-English speakers in a number of languages to fill out applications. This represents one of the barriers that seniors have to overcome with the help of the BHA and other advocates in order to apply. These difficulties create a barrier to the application process. And we see that a lot of seniors don't apply to the BHA or to other housing opportunities because of these difficulties. And as we talked to non-elderly disabled applicants, we found a different story, that non-elderly disabled applicants were more able to fill out an application successfully than their senior applicants, because the non-elderly disabled population was better able to go through the application process, understand what the application required, and fill out the necessary forms to be a successful applicant. So I think in general, looking at all this, the takeaway that we found was that because of structural difficulties inherent in the elderly population going through the application process, the number of successful applicants who are elderly likely underrepresent the total application pool of elderly applicants. So we need to keep this in mind from a policy perspective as we try to estimate the total elderly population, that in comparison to the non-elderly disabled population, there are probably we're probably seeing an underrepresented group of elderly qualified applicants who make it through with this successful application for public housing. Thank you.